Handraiser is designed to turn voters into votes, and it does that through identifying, activating, and measuring the voters who are most likely to support you during the election. So what do we mean by that? We help you to identify voters through the combination of demographic information, voting history, even custom data fields that allow you to target the voters most likely to support you. And we enable your volunteers to identify friends and family voters, which we find are 25% more likely to turn out to polling stations compared to the general population of voters. In addition, we empower you to activate those voters through the use of voice over IP calling, mobile canvassing apps, text message, and email messages. Your messaging will stay consistent through the use of a single tool, and with custom scripts, your volunteers will never go off message. And finally, measuring the support of those volunteers through the use of custom surveys and through the use of poll watching apps, which enable your volunteers to stand at a polling location and mark off those voters who have already voted, thus informing the system which voters you should be reaching out to come election day. So let's dig into it a little bit and see how that works. As a supervisor, I can log into the system and look at a variety of different information about any single voter that's been loaded into the system, from simple information like name and whether or not they voted in the current election, to whether or not I've identified them as a supporter or a detractor. In addition, I have party information, their primary and general voting history, and a variety of other information about them, which I can use to filter and identify those voters most likely to support. Beyond that, custom fields enable you to add any information you may have about a set of voters into the system and further target them based on those details. Once I've identified the information that's relevant to the voters I'm looking for, I can easily filter based off of any of the information loaded into the system. So by simply checking a few boxes, I can search for specific age, specific gender, and if I want, even their primary voting history or their general voting history. Now I have a targeted list of voters that I want to reach out to, and I can start to activate those voters. To do so, I'll call them using an integrated voice over IP calling system designed to make it simple and easy for your volunteers to stay on message and on point. Scripts are completely custom, as well as any questions and answers to those questions you may want to allow voters to provide. Calling is a simple click away, and after every call, your volunteers can enter details about what happened over the course of the call. For those volunteers going door to door, the mobile canvassing apps allow volunteers to find voters by street and house, and then perform the same survey questions that are asked during the script process when calling someone. This allows you to filter your voter set based on a consistent, singular set of questions and a simple set of answers that you design and decide. After every visit, it's a simple click away to say, I spoke to the voter, and move on to the next house. For volunteers to identify those that are friends and family is also a single click away. By logging in as a new volunteer, I can see a list of voters in my precincts, and by simply clicking the F and F column, I can change this to a check mark and say that yes, I know this person, and yes, I will be responsible for getting them to the polling stations. To further communicate with my voters, I can also send email messages or through the same interface text messages to a list of voters that have been selected and identified as likely supporters. Finally, on election day, it's important to know which voters have voted already and tailor your volunteer experience to focus solely on those voters who are supporters who have not yet voted. And that can be done through the use of the poll watching app. By simply typing in a name, I can get a list of voters that match that name, and by tapping on any one of those names, I can mark them as voted. That information is immediately uploaded to the Handraiser system and reflected in reports as well as in filters to make sure that your volunteers are only calling those voters who have already voted. Come election day, I can see reports that show me how well I'm doing, both across the entire election base, as well as on a precinct by precinct basis. By looking at the overall voter turnout report, I'm able to see that my supporters, 1,100 of my supporters have voted out of a total of 1,300 overall votes. Here I can see that 276 of the remaining are unknown, so they're not necessarily detractors, and I know that I'm doing well in this election. If I drill down into detail, I can look at that same report on a precinct by precinct basis. Here I see the same details, but they're provided specific to the precinct. In this case, if I look at the first precinct, I see that 122 of my supporters have voted, 44 unknown, and 4 of my detractors have voted. Throughout the course of the day, I can reposition my volunteers. If I see that I have maxed out my turnout amongst my supporters in a given precinct, I may want to assign volunteers to another precinct. Or if I see that I will easily win a precinct, I may want to reassign in that case as well. I can also view reports about calls and poll watching that's happening, so I know that my volunteers are staying on top of their game, providing the information necessary at the relevant time, and win come election day. And that's what matters the most. Identifying those supporters, communicating and activating those supporters, and then measuring their turnout on election day. That's how Handraiser will help you turn voters into votes.